Throughout history, the difference between a pirate and a national hero on the seas often hinged on a single piece of paper. The same ships, the same cannons, the same violence, the same stolen cargo. The only difference was whether a government approved it or not. If you had the right document, you were a privateer defending national interests. If you didn't have that paper, you were a pirate destined for the gallows. History remembered one as a patriot, the other as a thief. And the ocean didn't care. In fact, piracy wasn't a collapse of the system. It was the system being outsourced. Looking closely, it's hard to argue otherwise. Because for much of history, states didn't fight piracy. They licensed it, financed it, profited from it, and then abandoned it when political calculations changed. Outsourcing violence to a private firm and calling it patriotism. Law and order can only be explained this clearly. Welcome to the place where money, power, and history collide. Nothing is as simple as it seems. Unless you understand the problem of early modern empires, you cannot grasp how piracy became such a huge business. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the global turret exploded. Silver flowed from America, spices from Asia. Sugar, tobacco, and textiles filled the oceans. Profits were enormous, as were the risks. Voyages took months, and communication was delayed for months. No state, no matter how powerful, had the resources to patrol every sea route and escort every trade convoy. Navies were expensive. Wars broke out frequently. States sought a way to project power cheaply, flexibly, and on a large scale without allocating permanent resources. And they found it: subcontracting. They began issuing official licenses called letters of marque. These documents gave private ships the right to attack, seize, and plunder ships belonging to enemy states. The violence was identical to piracy. The difference was the license. This document legalized plunder. Seized ships were considered booty, and the revenue was shared among the crew, investors, and the state. This wasn't chaos, it was financial engineering. The state didn't pay salaries, didn't bear the losses, didn't manage daily operations. Private investors financed the ships. Captains found crews willing to take risks. If the voyage failed, the loss was private. If successful, the profits were shared. The crown received its share without firing a single shot. This was one of the earliest examples of privatized risk and nationalized reward. The model was brutally simple. Investors financed the violence. Crews risked their lives. Governments generated revenue and weakened their rivals. Failure was misfortune, success was national defense. Sir Francis Drake is remembered as a hero in England for doing exactly what would have been done under another flag. But he wasn't alone. France, by distributing thousands of letters of marque, turned the English Channel into a hunting ground for enemy trade. The Dutch Republic relied on sea beggars to survive against Spain. Even in the Mediterranean, Ottoman-backed pirates, under state patronage, attacked Christian ships, channeling the spoils into the imperial network. The irony was Spain's role. The massive silver fleets from America were so valuable and predictable that they became floating targets. As Spain sought to monopolize trade with centralized control, piracy became more profitable for its rivals. Queen Elizabeth I not only turned a blind eye to Drake's raids on Spanish ships, but also quietly invested in them. When Drake returned with silver and goods plundered from Spanish vessels, the crown's share was enormous. England publicly denied responsibility while privately reaping the profits. Convincing denial became policy. This system created a complete shadow economy around legitimate violence. Shipyards, ports, insurers, courts. Violence was normalized, priced, and integrated into the financial system. It was not an exception, but a feature of the system. And those who profited the most were not usually the sword wielders. Crew members lived ruthless, expendable lives. Disease, shipwreck, conflict, and execution were constant threats. The crew only received payment if the voyage was successful. Investors spread the risk across many ships, and governments profited and weakened their enemies without formally declaring war. The further away from the deck, the more secure and profitable the system became. Over time, the line between legal and illegal became so blurred that even contemporaries found it difficult to distinguish. A ship could be legal one year and criminal the next, bound by a treaty signed thousands of kilometers away. The violence remained the same, only the paperwork changed. Legitimacy became fluid, transactional, and retroactive. And this instability sowed the seed of a dangerous idea. Some pirates began to notice something unsettling. They were the ones taking the risk. They were the ones fighting. The state was merely granting permission, that's all. And that permission could be revoked at any moment. If the war ended, if a treaty was signed, overnight a licensed pirate could become an outlaw hunted by the very governments that once praised him. In clandestine conversations, some crew members began to ask a dangerous question. If the work is the same, the risk is the same, the violence is the same, why share the profits? Why give a share to distant rulers who have never set foot on deck? Why obey rules that change more through politics than reality? The state had taught them how the business worked. Now some were ready to cut out the middleman. When the pirates realized they no longer needed permission, the logic of the system collapsed on its own. The model that states had created to outsource violence was now producing profit-sharing, rule-following, and unbridled competitors. These weren't rebels driven by ideology, but entrepreneurs responding rationally to incentives. If the work was dangerous, the seas merciless, and the rewards uncertain, the only way to justify the risk was to keep it all to oneself. This is where history often turns into myth. But the truth is more disturbing. Many pirate crews were organized with rules that seemed surprisingly modern. Captains were elected, loot was divided according to predetermined shares, compensation was paid for injuries, and decisions were made by vote. In an age when crew members were considered expendable labor, pirate ships sometimes offered more predictable governance than the nations that hunted them. This didn't make them moral, it made them efficient. And efficiency, when it gets out of control, is dangerous. For governments, this independence was intolerable. Pirates weren't just criminals stealing goods. They were also undermining the authority of the state. Violence, when well organized, didn't need a crown. So the same states that built their empires on piracy suddenly changed their tune. The pirates they once praised became monsters. Executions became public spectacles. Naval patrols increased. By the beginning of the 18th century, piracy was no longer beneficial, but competition. And the thing states destroy fastest is not immorality, but competition. The transition was brutal. Pirates were hunted down, hanged as warnings in ports, and erased from respectable history. Agreements like the 1856 Paris Declaration formally ended piracy. This wasn't because states found it immoral, but because it had become powerful enough to possess a monopoly on violence. As navies became large, centralized, and professional, outsourcing risk became unnecessary. The state abandoned the model not because it was wrong, but because it no longer needed partners. But the logic never disappeared, it only evolved. Modern states still privatize risk. They rely on private actors for politically beneficial, but publicly objectionable ventures. Private military companies operate where regular armies cannot. Companies raise funds with state support, but their accountability remains limited. Financial institutions take risks knowing that if things go wrong, losses will be borne elsewhere. The uniforms changed, the sailboats disappeared. But the incentive mechanism remained the same. This is precisely where piracy ceases to be a story of the past and becomes a mirror. In modern financial systems, profit is often privatized while risk is distributed, deferred, or denied. If strategies succeed, profits skyrocket. If they fail, the consequences are shared widely. This is the very same system of piracy perfected centuries ago. Capital finances the operation, labor bears the risk, and authority takes its share while maintaining its distance. And when the results become politically toxic, accountability evaporates. The disturbing truth is, legitimacy has always been flexible when it comes to power. Pirates weren't bad guys because they used violence. They were bad guys because they were uncontrollable. Pirates weren't heroes because they were legal. They were hailed as heroes because they were profitable and obedient. The difference was never in morality, but in authorization. The most successful criminals in history didn't break the system. They worked for it. This shows that we need to reevaluate how we think about money, power, and legitimacy today. When systems reward results rather than methods, when incentives encourage risk-taking without accountability, and when authority is willing to turn a blind eye as long as profit flows, piracy doesn't disappear. It just changes brand. The lesson here isn't that states are evil or pirates are noble. It's that economic systems shape behavior far more reliably than laws. People react to incentives. If violence, exploitation, or resource extraction is profitable and tolerable, they will continue, regardless of the language used to legitimize them. Piracy teaches us something deeply disturbing.